Hi, my name's Courtney Hughes. It's predominantly for Nancy and James. And you addressed some of this around payments for ecosystem services when you talked about the social aspects, the intrinsic value of nature. But it's really a question around the no pay, no care attitude that could be a potential risk from payments for ecosystem services schemes. And in particular, the devaluing of nature, the commodification, the monetization, what happens when we put dollar signs and we see things hopping around on the landscape in totally dollars and cents. So that no pay, no care attitude, if you could speak to that.
You want to go? You're the guest.
Thank you. That's a great question. I actually have had my economist card revoked because I am very sensitive to, I think, the foundation of this question, which is when you do put nature in dollar terms, it can actually be a huge turnoff. And I almost think we've overcompensated. It's very gratifying. I mean, 20 years ago, if you were an economist in this area, it was very hard to find friends.
It was lonely.
We had to stick together.
Yeah.
And now it's almost bizarre how, oh, great, let's put a dollar value on all this stuff. My feeling on it is it's really a strategic and a communications question. I think if you're talking to a congressional committee, you know, what I've found is generally the higher up the food chain you go, the more people have no time to read and think. And so that's when the dollar value really helps. It's like, okay, is $50 million? Okay, I know what that is. But when you're working with communities and real people, and particularly when you're really trying to talk about the economics of this as a communications approach, to really start getting people to see the value of nature in their own lives, dollar values can really obscure that rather than enlighten it. And so, first of all, I'm very sympathetic to the question. The other thing is, you'll see in my presentation, I didn't actually talk about outcomes as being dollar outcomes. I think if we can do a better job of talking about the outcomes we care about, you know, more trout, water that you can see through and drink. As long as we're expressing the outcomes in terms people understand, that's 95% of the battle. Now, I would turn it around to my colleagues in ecology and say that if you're talking about, you know, benthic characteristic Z, you know, or nitrate levels of X, we have to do better than that. That means something to you, but means very little to anybody else. And so translating these outcomes into terms that your next door neighbor understands is the key thing. So anyway, thank you for that question.
I'd just add, I think it's really context specific. So if I'm talking about protecting wetlands allows us to not spend 5 times, 10 times the amount of money on putting in new sewage treatments, water treatment plants, then I can get down to the value of a wetland per hectare is, and nobody gets upset about it. If I'm talking, I don't think, I mean, because I'm talking about it as an alternative. So the cost of not protecting it is something that resonates really well that I've found. But if you're talking about sort of the broader protecting nature, protecting natural attributes, this is why I like my national pension plan thing, because it's talking about nature as an investment, but it's not quantifying or monetizing individual component parts. It just says we should do more saving. So I think it really matters the context and the particular application you're going in. And I like Andrew's stuff in this one of his messages, in that it's not really the dollars per invasive weed, it's the notion that people think this is important. So like it or not, in our economic system, things that are important tend to have higher prices, but it doesn't have to be a price per unit, which is what gets it sort of like, I don't know, what's an additional rodent? No, rodents are bad in this province. What's an additional,
like
what's an additional owl worth?
Yeah, we like beaver. Next question.
Hi, I'm Ken Lewis, and my question is for Andrew, and it's kind of picking up on what was just said there, I think. Just wondering, are you finding at the website, are people coming to the site and looking and learning but not donating, or is there a lack of traffic to begin with?
And as the administrators of the site, that's our job, is to generate overall traffic to Clean Water Future. We've got a reasonable number of friends on the Facebook site, but for the most part, people are coming there because they've been pushed by a particular project email. And I think that makes sense given the reason that people are investing. We have had a few people that just sort of landed there and gave us $100 for a particular project, but the vast majority of people were pushed by projects.
Thanks.
Jonathan Scarth, great presentations, enjoyed them all. I had a question for James on what he sees as the next step in terms of the evolution of the conservation provisions of the Farm Bill in the U.S., the CRP program. Obviously has been fundamentally changed, and I was very interested when I think Senator Harkin introduced the Conservation Security Act some time ago, and where that sort of thinking seemed quite aligned with the EG&S types of policies you were talking about. Where do you see the next step in that evolution south of the border?
The first step in the evolution is me understanding the Farm Bill better than I do. No, it's tough to sort through. I think the Farm Bill every 5 years becomes this opportunity for these kind of issues to arise, and you can view it as a half full or half empty kind of thing. I think that the conservation programs in the U.S. Farm Bill are arguably one of our best test beds for this kind of thinking. So I really appreciate that about the Farm Bill and its evolution. Another thing that's happened and that doesn't get enough attention is a set of programs that are actually evaluating, their purpose is to actually evaluate the performance of these investments. And I have one frustration, this would be my personal vote, is to have those programs communicate better, quite honestly, because I think they're key to generating this kind of credibility and sense that someone's minding the store and we're actually really are learning about what we're getting for our money. In general, a little bit of pessimism. I mean, if you look at the map, if you compare the map of Farm Bill payments, where they are on the U.S. geography to any kind of conservation-oriented map of priority areas, they just don't match up. And so the thought that we're going to take that huge amount of money and somehow divert it to achieving these more systemic conservation goals, that ain't going to happen. The politics are just too horrible. So that's the half-empty version. I think the half-full version is every 5 years, we continue to experiment, we continue to actually innovate with this. At scale, it really is one of the biggest things we do in the U.S. And then that emphasis on that performance evaluation piece, I think is going to be really important going forward.
And I think, just to add, I think on the glass half full side, the Farm Bill is getting more sophisticated in terms of some of these large landscape areas. So Craig talked about the Crown of the Continent, or no, that was plenary session. Anyway, the Crown of the Continent project. The large landscapes are designated in the Farm Bill, and the other thing that the Farm Bill is getting more sophisticated in is understanding that they have to be able to put money where there are water quality impacts. And a lot of that came from municipalities who have point source obligations saying, we're doing our job, can you please put money at non-point source problems within watersheds where there are cleanup plans. And so that's starting to happen, and it's targeting more than it used to, but I agree, it's not as good as it could be.
I'm sorry, can you wait 1 second? This is a great point. There is a sense in the U.S. The Clean Water Act has done an incredible job actually of targeting point sources, which tend to not be ag unless it's very concentrated ag. And the private sector, the industrial sector, the business sector, and the urban areas are getting fed up with that, quite honestly. In effect, you will hear the word extortion used. Well, you're asking us just because we can't go to zero discharge to pay a farmer well, wait, the farmers are the ones that are still, and suburbs and all those folks, they're really the problem. So that political dynamic, it's now starting to line up where I think the politics of the ag sector vis-a-vis the other sectors of our economy, it is actually changing. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Okay. Todd.
Hi, Todd Zimmerling. I'm with the Alberta Conservation Association. We actually do have a crowdsourced funding project on Indiegogo right now, trying to save piping plovers. So if you want to be a plover lover,
There you go.
you
Good
can help us out.
message.
So there's my advertisement and my attempt to get that out there.
Keep it up. Keep it up.
Yeah, we've raised all of $3,000. We need $100,000, so we've got ways to go. We do have corporate partners have stepped in, so I think we're going to be okay. But that's not what my question was. James, I believe you raised sort of the concept of full cost accounting when you're looking at environmental goods and services, in the sense you were talking about what impacts is a landowner having on environmental goods and services, and it sort of came up here. So I was wondering, do any of you have examples where that's actually been done, where you've said, okay, as farmer X, you're creating these goods and services, but you're also causing these detriments, so, plus this, minus that, and here's what a payment would be?
Can I just ask, and Nancy, I think with her interactions with Statistics Canada, has talked about some of this too, but are you talking about like the stacking and bundling issue, or are you just talking about broader accounting efforts to bring in the costs and benefits of natural capital?
I'm talking, this farmer is providing, I don't know, we'll plant a riparian zone on a farmer's land and we'll pay him for maintaining the riparian zone, but at the same time as a farmer, I'm putting phosphates into the water. So, there's a downside and an upside. So, those kinds of things. Have any examples where we've actually done that kind of accounting?
I don't want to say no to that. A couple of observations. I think, first of all, it's very rare in general to do a full benefit accounting of any kind. One is you have to hire a bunch of economists, and
Nobody wants to do that. Yeah,
nobody
I know.
wants to do
we're
that.
cheap. What do you mean?
And a point about that, actually, it's worse than you have to hire an economist. You may have to hire several, because we all are expert in different aspects of, like, there will be people who are good at water quality valuation. There will be people who are good at aesthetic valuation. What is much more typical is to set a goal. Let's say the regulator has this cooling water goal, and then you basically, again, you bid out the people, show us what kind of objective outcome you can give us at what cost. And that's different than measuring all the benefits and toting all that up. It's a simplification out of pragmatism, which is, maybe we don't need to put the full dollar benefit on this. What we want to focus on is just getting it at the cheapest cost we can. And that's much more typical in terms of analysis. I mean, there are definitely studies of the costs of water quality impairment related to agriculture. Whether they're closely paired, as in your question, to kind of the full benefits of agriculture in these other ways, that I'm having a little harder time answering. But Nancy, do you?
Well, I think it actually comes back to the first question, and here's where I'd say, again, following up on what Jim said, this is going to be expensive and costly to actually monetize everything. But environmental farm plans, part of the whole EFP process is, saying here's what we do, and then looking at acronyms, best management practices on your farm plan would be to get a qualitative view of, if you do this and not that. But actually going to the full monetization of it, I think would be, it would be very complex. But the concept of looking at your net impact and how you can do better here, and and yet we're going to help you do something that you're already doing to promote ecosystem services through the whole EFP process is, I think, actually something that has, certainly has had a lot of potential. A number of farmers across the country have taken up that, and it's also an education process. So part of it comes back to our comments on communication and knowledge sharing and education and getting the word out. So no, I don't believe we should be out there, paying for everything and monetizing everything, but that concept of value comes through in the process.
All right, thank you.
Thanks
Remember,
very
be a
much.
plover lover.
A clever lover.
Clever lover.
What's the minimum bid? No, nothing. A quarter? $1. Oh, okay.
Everything else.
We'll pass the word.
Think about those poor plovers. They're cute, aren't they?
They are.
Big eyes.
So it's
Big eyes.
another board member, Ted Morton, hello, and has a question.
Thank you.
I thought I'd help you out by
You
giving
all
your name.
identified one of the major obstacles to payment to landowners for ecological goods and services is where does the money come from? And I'd like to suggest that one source of very willing providers of funds for ecological goods and services is the hunting community. I know in all of our neighboring states south of the border, and I've visited and hunted in all of them, North and South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and Utah, there are programs in place that allow private landowners to charge for access for both hunting and fishing, and the result is that private landowners have an incentive to keep the woodlot, to keep the brush fields, to have cleaner riparian areas as a diversification of their source of income. So I'd appreciate a comment on that. And then just, I know I'm going to, again, abuse the privilege of having the mic here. I know there are a lot of counselors here, and some of you would remember that when I was the Minister of SRD, we introduced we tried two pilot projects. One got killed, the other went for 2 years down in Warner County. One was called Open Spaces, the other was called Recreational Access Management Plan. And both of them provided financial incentives, or one would have and one did, for landowners to allow people on for recreational access, but it was primarily hunting and fishing. And then there was a compensation payment made for the quality and quantity of habitat that the landowner made available. And I would hope here in Alberta that going forward with the next premier, that this project, we had a 2-year pilot project and it ended because of lack of funding after 2008. But I would hope in the go forward that we might bring these back, and for all of you that have lots of ranchers and farmers as voters and councillors, there are a whole bunch of people out there both in Alberta and BC and our friends south of the border who are willing to come to Alberta and pay landowners for habitat improvement that, okay, yes, it's for shooting birds and animals, but there are lots of other benefits that come from that as well. So, but my question is to the panelists and their view on that and experiences in the U.S.
Oh yeah, I love hunters. I think they're one of the most
Anglers.
and anglers. Yeah, I was going to say fishers and anglers, and there are a couple reasons. As you noted, first of all, they're pretty well organized compared to a lot of other groups, and that politically and institutionally, that's part of, they're real players. Whether, the sport fishing associations in the U.S. are some of the more effective environmental advocacy groups we have. So there's that. Just, the other thing that worries me, particularly maybe living on the East Coast where people just are not experiencing nature anymore, those communities actually are people who actually enjoy and experience nature now and are passing that along to their kids. And so anyone who's actually out on the landscape, I think, is our core constituency here. And then finally, yeah, I hear every once in a while, I'll hear this amazing story. You get these kind of recreational cooperatives. They're either buying land themselves, or they're buying easements, or they're investing in habitat improvements. And because they're creating these rich kind of hunting and recreational and aesthetic experiences for their core community, but the spillover benefits of that to the public are just incredible. And so anyway, I just want to reflect your sense and say I definitely see that and think that that's a core constituency for anyone to connect to.
And I think it comes down to, if you're thinking strategically, getting the benefit as close as you can. So again, for a hunter or an angler, when they invest in protecting a marsh or whatever, the benefit's right there. I use this for hunting, and it's very proximate. For someone to invest in a riparian bank stabilization project at the farm that they get their farm share from, or they go visit when they're up at their country house for a month in the summer, there's a benefit real close to them, proximate, and then the more ultimate benefit spill. That's an easier sell, and maybe that's the way we really focus some of this.
So I could see a sort of innovative idea of putting together some of the stuff we've been talking about here. What about a conservation bank that has that as one of its attributes? Put aside, whether it's a bunch of landowners coming together, some public lands, and you create a conservation bank, and then you sell shares.